Hi, this is International Master and author John Watson. This lecture series presents various repertoires for white and for black, and although these are mainly for inexperienced and average players, all the systems have been played by grandmasters, usually a number of super grandmasters, and certainly the one we're showing today, and they are all playable on a high level. We're starting a new repertoire tonight. In the previous 8 lectures, I laid out a repertoire for white in the Trompovsky attack, which was this response to the move knight f6, there, bishop g5. This leaves the question of what white might do against this. Now, if you go back to way the beginning of this series, I gave a repertoire for white with the London system, which is this move. Well, that's the order I gave. It also can be played like this. Very commonly played like that. So you could use that. It's something that would be playable and fairly simple to learn, quite simple really, and useful. But as these lectures go forward, I'm thinking that we might want to get a little more sophisticated and maybe even more importantly, learn about a broader set of positional ideas in terms of pawn structure and the like, and just more subtle ideas that if you understand better, you're more likely to beat your opponent. So c4 is one of those, using the move c4. Now on a master level and above, or actually even below for that matter, but especially on a master level and above, using c4 in conjunction with this move d4 is by far the favorite method of proceeding. For example, after d4, d5, which we have here, grandmasters usually play c4, so do masters, and if they don't play that, they tend to play this, and then whatever black plays, for example this, then c4. So and the point is that attacks the center. For practical reasons, I'm going to recommend this first, and then, as I say, c4 next against anything, even against this move, c4. We're going to play this kind of a Queen's Gambit. Here, c4, or knight f6, which is kind of the most normal and logical move because it keeps the bishop open, c4. And the nice thing about c4 is it attacks the center. It's good to attack the center. If black does nothing, you're going to take over the center. For example, here, and if queen takes here, and that's not good at all for black. And if takes, we take over the center with tempo with a tremendous game. Of course, black doesn't do nothing, but that's just to show you what the sort of the positional threat is. It's usually better to attack the center with pawns, and that's rather than just pieces, and that's why this, to some extent, it's not necessarily better than the London system, but it gives you more chances and more interesting chances. Okay, so I guess in the end, we do want, black is going to have to respond to this idea, and we will start looking at this move, but in a slightly different move order. We'll start with the traditional, let's say that after knight f6, we play c4, and now black plays e6. That's going to be the theme of our first lecture series here on c4. So we're going to look at the Queen's Gambit declined. This is the Queen's Gambit declined. It's sort of a Ruy Lopez of queen pawn openings. In a future series, we'll look at this and this, the Queen's Gambit accepted. So that's the Slav and the Queen's Gambit accepted. But right now we're looking at this. It's been around forever with countless games by every world champion, every challenger. And fortunately, unlike the Ruy Lopez, which is sort of the king pawn equivalent of the main line of the king pawn in a sense, there's no Berlin defense, which is the variation that neutralizes the Ruy Lopez on move 3. Or even something like the Marshall Gambit, which pretty much draws in every line, and so white has to pick something else before then usually. So that's kind of the level on which we're on, though. We're on the very most traditional line that was played for years and years. Let me play one more move for white here, which is the move we're going to make, putting more pressure on here. This position, basically, or something like it, was played for eons with d4, d5, without really much else being played. So this Queen's Gambit declined was sort of the key thing, and it's still very important. It's still played by top players, but of course d4, d5 is a broader subject than it used to be. Okay, anyway, we've got knight c3, and we're going to look at the traditional developing move bishop e7 first. What does it do? It's played the most common move by far, actually. It prepares castling, and it gets a piece out, develops. So it's very logical. And to this, we're not going to be responding with this, the traditional move, followed by this, or any kind of exchange idea like that, but rather with the move bishop f4. And that's sort of the theme. That's our anti-Queen's Gambit declined move, and we'll look at all sorts of options even before this, but we want to show you the main line first because that's the sort of that's what we want to get a feel for what we're kind of headed for. It's the position that most often comes up in top level play. In the bishop f4 has been played by just about every top player, actually. Even though bishop g5 is the main line, you'll find many more games with bishop g5 historically. Bishop f4 has been played by just about every world champion, I think, and all kinds of other players. Just recently, in the recently concluded candidates match tournament, which is the one that decides the World Championship Challenger, you'll find that Topalov defeated Kramnik with bishop f4. And in fact, White got a really superior opening, which had a lot to do with it. You don't often get a superior opening, not even a smidgen against Kramnik, so that shows you something. And Kramnik's played this as White too, and Kasparov played it, and the list goes on and on. So, with all that said, let's move on to this game in front of us, which had a slightly different move order. And that move order was here, 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 first, there, there. So you can see it's very similar. This is as if he had played knight f3, e6, c4, and it gets even more transpositional with that move. White plays there, and we're back to our main position. And White plays there. That's our anti-Queen's Gambit declined repertoire. Black castles, by far the most common move. Now let me show you a line that's related to the line played in this game, which is to play this right away and attack that bishop. And obviously if White just defends that, then Black wants to get the two bishops, so it looks like White's going to have to retreat. Now, in this game, White plays this move, which is very clever, and I think it's the one, I'm sorry, it isn't this game. In a game I'm going to show you, White plays this move, which I think is actually probably the best move, or at least the most interesting. But White can also just retreat, and this knight doesn't look that great. This bishop doesn't look that great, but it looks a little better than the knight. So really I'm not so sure about knight h5 in principle, although this is obviously playable for Black. But in this game he plays this nice little move, stopping knight takes bishop. And Black plays this. If Black plays here, what we find is that this king side now is much looser with that move f6 in. There's also no bishop f6 or anything like that. This is a little looser. That's open file is a bit of a problem. That's the idea. So, for example, just to give you an example, here, 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 stopping checkmate with the queen, you'll notice. And White can probably do a number of things, but I think in this case I was just having him castle and then just break with e4. And Black's terribly passive here, and White has excellent attacking chances. A little bit of a weaknesses over there, and a great central advantage. So to make up for the bishop pair. Black's doing this, by the way, to get the bishop pair. He's not totally stupid, but the bishop pair, he's got to survive the middle game first, and that's not so easy. So the other way of playing this bishop e5 is to simply attack this directly. Put the knight on c6, and there's actually a game with this, and castles. Now this looks natural. Get rid of the two bishops, and it's a pretty solid move. But White takes back with a pawn. Now there's a threat to trap the knight and win a piece with this move. So that's very strong, very hard to get out of. And Black probably has to play a very awkward move like this, but then White wins a pawn because he's attacking this a couple times. So that would just lose a pawn. So knight takes is a mistake, and in this case he plays castles, takes, h3. The idea is now maybe the bishop will just go back, but also it supports this move g4, and it stops bishop g4. So it's a multi-purpose move, and you'd think since White's about to play bishop h2, Black might play here, but again, g4 is too big a threat. This is a real problem, and of course knight takes d5 is a threat. So black has to do something else, and in this case he did here, now threatening maybe to take. White retreated. Excuse me, let me see if I got this right. Actually, my fault. My fault, white didn't retreat. White, yes, white did retreat, I'll get this. Black retreated, that's what was confusing. And white attacks the king side, activates its bishop. Black decides to get rid of this bishop, even at the cost of a tempo. And white plays here, maybe threatening knight b5, but definitely having ideas of this. And in fact, after that move, played here with the idea of that, and got a terrific game. If this move, trying to stop knight c5, then something like just a simple move here, stopping knight b4 and therefore threatening this move. Even this kind of attack could come, or knight g5 is a possibility, or if the knight moves, there's knight e5. I mean, this is just not a good position. So getting back to the game, but that's interesting. That's the move knight h5 right away, and it shows you some of the key ideas. This bishop e5 move is worth remembering. But instead in this game, black castled, and white simply develops. It's going to bring a piece out, and black played here. So that's the theme again. It's the theme of this game basically. Here c5 is the traditional main line, played in a whole bunch of incredibly important games between top players, but we'll also be looking at other moves like a6 and the currently popular move, which is knight here. But c5 has been played more often than anything else and is extremely important. This move has also been played a fair amount, but probably isn't best. Once again, white plays this nice move, just stopping knight takes and hoping to weaken. He doesn't mind giving up the bishop, but he wants to weaken white's position first, black's position first, excuse me, and that's exactly what happens. Here. Now I think this is a particularly bad move order, really, for black. He has two bishops, but the fact that this is attacked, it's going to be attacked again with tempo. This bishop is coming to a nice square. This move e4 is in the air. Really is a little bit too much. One of the ideas now for white is to play, for example, a move like c takes d5 and then queen b3, pinning that knight and attacking it, that pawn, and then e4. And even if black can ever take on e4, then that diagonal is just a real problem in conjunction with this rook coming down this way. So that's kind of a threat and explains black's next move, which is this, just shoring up the center. White plays here very naturally, attacking here. Black stops that. You can imagine that h6 is very undesirable, weakens these squares. Moves like knight h4 and queen h5 and queen c2 followed by bishop h7, knight h4, something like that. And of course e4, when it comes, in a sense is going to be even stronger because these squares will always be a bit vulnerable. That doesn't mean h6 is a worse move because g6 doesn't turn out very well either, but I think g6 is actually better. Another thing about h6 is that it seems a little obscure, but there are also lines where suddenly white's just going to go like that. So I think g6 is a better move. Now, of course, you better watch out for bishop takes h6. And so black defends along the second rank, always a good idea. White castles, way ahead in development, and of course this idea is in the air. As well as just maybe doubling rooks and attacking. That's not a bad idea either. So knight here is good because it's going to defend the king side. It gets a piece out. White plays there. Now white's thinking about just piling up here. Maybe using that pawn, but at any rate, bringing another piece into the attack. I think objectively this is a better move and gives quite an advantage and shows that white's opening has been successful. White's, I don't think, quite as much better after this move, but he still stands better. Black's just too passive. These are passive pieces. So two bishops will win in the endgame probably, and they might even win in the middle game if they can stop white from making any kind of breakthroughs, attacks, or getting any kind of outposts or weak squares. Then okay, then black stands really well because he can slowly unwind and the bishops will assert themselves. But right now he's still getting attacked directly, and that's a strong move. That's breaking up the center, and it has one other idea, a big idea, which you will see in a move. White simply moves out of the way. Black thinks about c5. Now he's finally ready to think about c5. And white attacks both g6 and d5, which discourages c5. So black tries to get rid of that knight and maybe think about something like e5. At any rate, just get a little more active. You can take the queen off the last rank, that kind of thing. But this is the point where white forces weaknesses and things that at least resemble outposts, which means that suddenly the knights are more valuable. Also, notice how this opens up the direct attack again on g6. And in fact, now I think we're at pretty much a winning position. Black probably should have played g5, by the way, even though that's an awfully nice place for the knight. This is only somewhat better for white. The way the game went, pretty much winning. Could take with the pawn too, but this is nice because it gets rid of that. Now look, that dark square bishop has disappeared, so now look at these squares. So now it's positionally winning for white, because look at that bad bishop. So that's why he didn't play pawn takes on e5, because this gives him a much easier winning position, less complicated. Nice move. The idea is you can't stop him from getting to g5 after that move. And g5 is a beautiful place for the knight. Rook moves, and there's really nothing else to do here. If he plays a move like this, if nothing else, this can happen with the idea of just doubling. And in fact, if he plays here, he's going to get killed with that move. And even though the rook's defending on the second rank, so it's not as though there's yet another sacrifice yet, but there's just a simple move threatening this, which is threatening mate in just a few moves. So basically, or threatening something huge. So basically, black's lost, and e takes d5 doesn't really help matters. So he plays here, attacking the rook, and now threatening this monster move, so black has to take it, attacking the queen. So it's interesting because Hikaru Nakamura is known for his attacks, but this is really just so much simpler. This is like really great grandmasters do this. He just wins positionally. It's completely over. Notice black couldn't oppose that with this and simplify because that's a fork if he takes it. So that wouldn't have helped. And there's just a few more moves here. Now he dominates every square, and this knight is horrible, has no moves. So black tries to break out a little bit by giving up a pawn and getting a little bit of space, trying to get a little bit of counterattack. The problem is that white has now a pawn break to finish up the attack. Now f5 is unstoppable and fantastically good. And he plays it very soon, right now. And black in fact just resigns on the spot. It's maybe one example would be here, attacking here. Looks good, right? But and then maybe queen takes. If rook takes, check, and you're losing this with check. If queen takes, I think we can also simply play f6 check. Yes, because if queen takes, which would be the only move, this rook is hanging. So that's that game, and what did we learn from that? Well, first of all, we got introduced to this order, which we're going to spend some time on. It is the main line of this Queen's Gambit decline that we're going to play, and the most common sequence for black. So we're going to take a little time with this before we move on to some of the other moves. And then that little trick, the bishop e5, meaning that black's king side is weakened. And by the way, white's winning percentage of this position is huge, absolutely huge. So this is not just a particular set of opponents or a particular game in which this is working. Let's get to one more game for this week. Okay, now we're going to look at a classic bishop f4 victory. You'll see pretty soon what's going on with the move order. There we are. Again, okay, bishop f4, this is our main line. And again, black castles, white plays a simple e3 to get the bishop out. And last time we saw knight h5. This time we're going to see the traditional main move. This is a very famous game in the World Championship. One of the times that Korchnoi beat Karpov. Bishop f4 has won some big games over the years. So we looked at knight h5 last time. Remember, bishop e5. And here's another move which is sometimes played and maybe worth taking a quick look at. So let's look at that. I prefer this cramping move because this move probably isn't all that good. Real quickly though, you could get probably a small advantage by simply taking. Oh, by the way, what's black's idea with a6? Well, it's to take and then play b5 with tempo on the bishop and then play bishop b7, and that in fact would equalize. The other option is to play like this, just play very simply and then give the bishop an escape square here, and white probably, and stop bishop g4 by the way, and this is probably some kind of advantage. Something like this can happen. And in fact, this position is worth showing briefly because it's sort of a standard kind of position in this bishop f4 line. White's probably a little better here, not obviously a lot better, but the main point is that black can't get rid of his weakness with that, or at least not punishment free, because this position, this kind of position, favors white, who can just play rook here next and just has more active pieces and some ideas of, you know, bishop e5s and attacking on the king side. So, and also, you know, this is a little tied down to that pawn might be taken at some point. There's just a lot of little elements that add up to white having a better game here. But that wasn't forced, by the way. Black didn't have to play d4. So, you know, this isn't much of an advantage. I think c5's more interesting and probably objectively better too. So after that, for example, now black probably would go after this. He can't really, the key with c5 is that you have to make sure that black can't somehow break up the center, for example, with a move like e5, but he can't. So we get this again. Now again, this I think is fine. The fact that there's no pawn pressure here is probably a little better for black than the other variation, but it's still quite good for white, I think. But he plays instead just, oh, this move, and this is one reason to show this is very instructive, which is that this pawn structure, even though these are doubled, covers the freeing move e5 3 times and 4 times if there's a rook on an open file, so that you also just opened a file, and of course f5 can be a move too. So this kind of position tends to favor white. Kasparov played this against Spielman, this exact position in 1995. So, and white can also expand on the queen side here, by the way. That's another plan. Making it sound like a huge advantage, it really isn't, but it is, I think, better for white. Now, next we have, so okay, we're back to the game with c5, and white opens the d file to attack d5 again, and also he just doesn't want to lose time, and he wants to make black lose time, because black's taken back, very good square for the bishop, but it has taken him 2 moves to get there. And now white plays here. Now, a lot of people play a3 here. And you can play a3 first, but I think this is maybe it's a little easier move order. It indirectly attacks this bishop, right? Moves like there. Now, there isn't a threat yet of taking on d5, but there is a little indirect attack there. It covers the move knight e4, which is sort of a standard defensive move. And it, of course, aims at the king side, and it has ideas of either castling queen side or playing rook d1. Castling queen side is risky in d-pawn openings, or risky in almost every opening. Just because it's easy to attack. So the only reason white would castle queenside is because he does lead in development and has a little more space. So, but anyway, in this game, black just attacks, and white decides to just play the rook over, rather than playing for castling queenside, which is, as I say, riskier. And now, yeah, I should say that we're going to see this move order here, here, here. That's the main line. You'll see that, and that involves different possibilities for black besides queen a5, and we'll look at some options later. Okay, so instead in this game he plays rook d1 immediately. Black plays queen e5 and a3, so it's transposed to one of the things we just looked at, and black plays this funny move. This is very early in the theory of some of these lines, and black just wants to play here and blast away, maybe with this move, maybe with this move. That gets that bishop out. It's a very logical move. The problem with, and also it's tactically sound, because if b4, then black can simply take that, and now he's got 2 pawns to the piece and is threatening that, which is hard to defend, very hard to defend, because knight e4 is coming. And these moves are still coming. Turns out that's too big an attack. So b4 is a mistake. White doesn't play it. White instead plays, by the way, our main move order is going to be here, I should say. Rook e8 is not probably objectively a very good move at all. Okay, so instead of this now, white plays a very nice move, this move, and that's maybe what puts the question to rook e8. It's not an obvious move. has ideas of forking. It also means after b4 this knight will be unpinned if black sacrifices on b4. So b4 is becoming a threat. It stops knight e4 again, and it gets out of the way of e5, e4 for black. So that's not at all obvious, but theory has sort of shown that this is just a very good move. Really, black has to be consistent in attack, but now there's an idea of getting doubled pawns there, and more importantly, this whole center is very loose. Knight takes d5, or just putting a knight on d5, whether it's a capture or not. So bishop f6, b4 is threatened, and you might think, what is black doing? Well, this was the idea. Because if that gets taken, black has a terrific attack. But white simply plays here, just a very simple, clever move, and all of a sudden black's center is kind of hanging. He's got the same problems with these kinds of moves in the center, and it turns out this is a very, very good position for white after all. Black plays here. He's got to keep some sort of initiative going. White plays here. Black can't afford to simplify because he'll have this b4 threat, this will become a threat, and that'll become a threat. So what he does is he keeps the attack going by, or at least he can't afford to give up the initiative, so he keeps the attack going by that. And white plays the natural move here, but it turns out later that people analyze this, and black just has too many problems here, and in fact white's pretty much winning this position. So that's why, in fact, you never saw this variation again, this particular opening with rook e8 and knight d4. Not even rook e8 I don't think was ever played again. So this ended up being, or at least not a top level play. So this ended up being essentially refuted. So that's good for us since we're playing bishop f4 for white. But I wanted to show you anyway, just because it's a classic game and it has some big themes. This knight d2 move is really critical. And also you got some b4 ideas in. By the way, white's threatening b4 now because the queen's even, you couldn't even sacrifice after b4. So you can imagine this. But in a world championship, you really don't want, especially if you think you're going into preparation. Black is so well developed and has so many things kind of near the king, and it's just very scary. So he picks the safe line. I'm sure he didn't want to burn up a lot of time calculating bishop f1. And still stands better. He has to get out of the way of bishop b4, so he retreats the queen. That's a good move because it also covers this. And in fact, if you look at it, black has lost a pawn, but done as well as he possibly could do from that position that we were just looking at. You can go back and look at that, but this is actually quite a clever defense by black. White's still better. This is very unclear though, because this pawn's attacked, and if he castles, well, it's true that doesn't mean anything, but this first threatens this. And, that's two bishops with an attack against the king. Got to watch out for things. These kinds of moves might be very dangerous. So maybe even just queen h4, not worth it. Not worth it for white to do this, especially because white had a nice option that he'd anticipated, which was to play this first. And now the idea is that after that move, which is pretty obvious but also pretty forced, white takes with the rook. And now there's no attack. Queen g5 is answered by rook takes d6, if nothing else. And the rook's active, ready to double, and this position is now really just winning. He's just a pawn ahead for white. Although with two bishops, it's always a little unclear. I'll just show you some of the moves. They weren't perfectly accurate, obviously. There's a lot of decisions to be made up to this point. I'm sure they were getting in time trouble even at this point. These are not the most accurate moves, probably, but it was enough for white to win the game. There's a mistake. There's a place where he should have simply played here. This move b5 would get one of the pawns back, but it turns out it's perfectly good for white. What he did, giving the pawn back that way, ended up not being ideal. But white was still better, especially after this. Black shouldn't have played queen e5, should have played bishop e7, but I'm not going to waste your time showing you that. Basically, the opening, you can see what's happened, and the rest is sort of technique. And pretty good technique, actually. These are not bad moves by any means. They just aren't absolute. Not all of them are ideal. So what's new, right? That's a mistake. Black really could hang on here with that move. White, of course, has all the winning chances in the endgame. Outside pass pawn. But, black can take. Play f5, bring the king over. It's not going to be easy. But I think it's winning objectively. But this actually made it easier. I think he's just trying to mix things up in time trouble, because that bishop being pinned is such a bother, and this pawn is just so strong. And I'll just show you how this finished. It's only one pawn ahead, but it just turns out that pawn gets really strong. Black really looks like he's making mistakes if you look at the game as a whole, but it turns out he really didn't have anything anyway. Good move, attacking that pawn. Now attacking the bishop, and now the king gets into play. So there's a little bit of fiddling around here. And then white plays the winning idea. By the way, if black had kept repeating, just rook d5 would have won. So partly this is just practical moves, waiting for mistakes before they make the big pull. Now of course that's hanging, and that pawn is close to queening. And now, okay, one check, the king's advancing, and it just turns out this is too much. Black checks a few times, and now this very nice move. Because if rook takes, you're going to get king over attacking the rook, pawn takes, and then queening. So at this point, black resigned. Okay, that's it for this week. Let's look real quickly at that opening again, just because that's what we're looking at as openings. Bishop f4, and this time instead of knight h5 we saw our first look at c5. We also took a look at a fairly important alternative a6, and we said that either move takes, maybe only gives you a small advantage. c5 led to very good play, and it's probably objectively a better move. Okay, and then we looked at the game itself, and got to actually a very main line, and it's hard for black to avoid this main line, by the way. He really has to decide to do something besides queen a5. The other moves are all normal. He has to put a queen on e7 or somewhere else, and we'll see that that's not very good. So this was the main line for a reason. Rook e8 is nearly refuted by that move, knight d2, as it turns out. But of course this was very early on in the theory, and Karpov thought he had something going with this idea about e5 and knight d4, this very aggressive idea. Okay, so that's beginning with our Queen's Gambit declined repertoire, and I'll see you guys next week.